Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into something really critical, the world of school leadership and improvement. Our source material is fascinating. It's a detailed look at a school improvement strategy for Hunter's Glen Junior Public School.
Yeah, and it's framed as a Leadership Inquiry Practicum, or LIP proposal. So think of it like a blueprint.
A blueprint, exactly. It's not just theory, right? It's
Yeah.
about how a real principal and staff are trying to tackle a very specific data-backed problem in their school.
That's what makes it so valuable. It shows that whole messy process, taking all this data, which, as we'll see, can be kind of contradictory,
Right.
and trying to boil it down into one clear, focused, and importantly, actionable plan. The whole point is linking what the adults do leadership, teaching methods directly to how students actually perform.
Okay, so before we get into the plan itself, we really need to understand the context here.
Yeah.
Hunter's Glen, what kind of school are we talking about? The sources flag one indicator right away. The LOI, Learning Opportunities Index, it's 152.
Yeah, that LOI of a 152 is, well, it's a really high number.
What does that actually mean for someone not familiar with that index?
It basically puts Hunter's Glen right up there with schools serving populations with the highest needs. It's a signal of significant socioeconomic disadvantage.
So like poverty.
Exactly. When you look behind that number, the sources tell us 33%, a third of families, are below the low-income cutoff. And 21% receive social assistance.
Wow.
So you're talking about a school operating right in the middle of some serious urban poverty and disparity. And that context, it changes everything.
Yeah.
Any plan they make has to consider how poverty affects student energy, attendance, resources at home, all of it.
That context makes achieving any goal incredibly challenging, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Exponentially harder.
So given that backdrop, the leadership couldn't just aim for something easy. They had to really narrow things down. What's the core mission? What's the specific inquiry question driving this whole Hunter's Glen plan?
Okay, so after digging through the data, they refined it to the central question. It's pretty detailed, but it sets the direction. How can Hunter's Glen enhance staff capacity in social-emotional learning support and build culturally responsive relationships with newcomer parents, particularly those of students with diverse learning needs, like, say, on the spectrum or with ADHD, to improve student learning skills and foster a more inclusive and supportive school environment?
Okay, let's unpack that. That's a mouthful, but what jumps out right away is that dual focus. It's not asking how do we fix the students. It's asking how do we improve the system around the students.
Right.
It's targeting the adults, staff skills, parent relationships as the main ways to get change.
Precisely. The leadership seems to get that the best bang for their buck isn't, a fancy new program necessarily. It's building the core capacity of the staff to handle the complex emotional, behavioral, organizational needs of kids who are under a lot of stress.
And they're zeroing in on the most vulnerable kids within that system, too.
Yeah.
Newcomers, kids with ADHD, kids on the spectrum.
Right. Yeah, because those are often the students who face the most challenges fitting into typical school structures. Makes sense.
So if the adults are the focus, the data must show why they need that focus. Let's get into that data deep dive. We have the LOI of 152. What else does the demographic picture tell us about the students at Hunter's Glen?
Well, it confirms it's a really diverse community. Get this, 26% of the students were born outside Canada.
Wow, over a quarter.
And 16%, a significant chunk, arrived just within the last 5 years.
So lots of newcomers navigating a totally new system.
Right. And you can't just use generic strategies then. The sources mentioned Tamil and Urdu are common languages spoken. So outreach has to be culturally sensitive. It has to go way beyond just translating a flyer,
Yeah. These students are dealing with learning a new culture, maybe a new language, plus the regular school stuff.
Exactly. Acculturation stress on top of academic demands. That's crucial context when we start looking at their learning skills.
Okay, so that's the student profile. Now, how are they doing? This is where the sources say the alarm bells really went off for the school leadership. There's this worrying downward trend in basic skills.
This is really the heart of the problem they identify. The clearest warning sign is the drop in overall learning skills.
Well, what falls under learning skills? Like organization.
Yeah, things like responsibility, self-regulation, organization, initiative, those foundational work habits. The percentage of students getting good or excellent in those scales, it dropped from 81% in 2021-22 down to just 70% in 2023-24.
An 11-point drop. That feels significant. That's more than 1 in 10 kids suddenly struggling with just managing how they learn.
It's huge. And if students can't manage themselves or stay organized, it makes learning content much harder. You see that reflected elsewhere, too.
Like in specific subjects.
Yep. Science, particularly. Students hitting levels 3 and 4, basically, meeting or exceeding the standard that dropped from 76% down to 54%.
Wait, 76 down to 54? That's a 22-point drop? That's massive for science achievement.
It's a free fall. And the plan, based on the sources, calls for a few things in response. Reviewing the curriculum, obviously.
Makes sense.
But also boosting teacher training, specifically on inquiry-based learning, getting kids doing science, not just reading about it, and making sure there are enough resources for hands-on stuff. They clearly saw the teaching approach wasn't working for these kids.
So you've got learning skills down, science results down, and then there's another key indicator affecting everything: attendance.
Yeah, the absenteeism data is another red flag. It went up from an average of 10.9% to 13.7%.
So kids are missing more school.
More school. And in a place with an LOI like Hunter's Glen, that rise is probably linked to all sorts of systemic issues, family health, transport problems, money pressures.
Yeah.
But whatever the cause, missing that much school roughly 1 day out of every 7 makes it almost impossible to build consistent skills or knowledge.
Okay, so far it seems pretty clear. Skills down, results down, attendance down. A straightforward problem, maybe? But this is where the data gets tricky. The land of contradictions.
Right. This is where it gets really interesting, and you see why leadership needed this structured inquiry process. Let's start with the math paradox.
Paradox, how so?
Because the math data tells 2 completely different stories at the same time. If you look at the EQAO results, that's the provincial standardized test,
Right.
math achievement actually went up a bit, from 63% at levels 3 and 4 to 70%. So that looks okay, maybe even good.
Okay, a modest increase on the big test. But then what about the school's own report card data for math?
Well, that's where things get wild. The report card math results show this absolutely massive leap. They went from only 15% of students at levels 34.
15%, that's really low.
Dismal. But then it jumps to 58% 2 years later.
Whoa, wait, 15% to 58%. How is that even possible? How can the standardized test show a slow climb to 70%, while the school's internal grades showed this explosion from 15% to 58%? That gap is enormous.
It's huge. And that's the critical question, right? The sources suggest it could be down to really inconsistent assessment methods between teachers or grades, or maybe the EQAO and the report card are just measuring totally different things.
Like EQAO is basic skills and report cards are projects.
Could be. Maybe the report card grading got, shall we say, more generous? Or maybe the focus shifted dramatically to easier tasks that don't reflect the provincial standard.
So you can't really trust that 58% number, can you? Even though it looks good on paper, you don't know if kids are actually learning more math or if the grading just changed.
Exactly. When your internal data clashes that badly with your external benchmark, the first step isn't necessarily more math lessons. It's fixing your assessment so you know what you're actually measuring. You need consistency.
And the confusion doesn't stop with math, right?
Yeah.
Literacy seems messy too, especially in the early grades.
Oh, yeah. Look at grade 1 reading levels. Total roller coaster. In 2022, only 40% were meeting the target.
Okay, less than half.
Then in 2023, it shoots up to 86%. Looks amazing.
It's huge improvement.
But then in 2024, it crashes right back down to 60%.
40%. 86%.
Yeah.
60%.
Yeah.
That's incredibly unstable. What does that even mean?
It screams instability, you have to ask. Did they change teachers, try a new reading program, and then ditch it? Were the assessments themselves unreliable, making that 86% just a blip? Leadership has to get a handle on their core reading instruction and assessment in grade 1 because you can't build success on that kind of volatility.
So grade 1 is chaotic. What about the overall literacy picture? Is it also contradictory?
It is, and this might be the biggest puzzle. The EQAO reading and writing results look fantastic, over 90% of students meeting the standard.
90%. Okay, so provincially they look great in literacy.
Right, but then you look at the school's combined elementary report card measure for literacy reading and writing together, and that shows only 53% achieving levels 3 or 4.
Hold on. Over 90% pass the provincial test, but only 53% are getting good grades on their report cards for literacy. How do you explain that?
That's the million-dollar question. Is the EQAO test just too easy a bar for the school? Or is the report card maybe demanding higher-level thinking or writing skills, showing the real gap? This discrepancy absolutely points back to needing system-level changes in how they assess and report learning.
Okay, one more piece of data that stood out, and it seems completely counterintuitive given everything else. Suspensions.
Ah, yes, the suspension anomaly. Given the high LOI, the poverty, the stress, and the fact that the leaders themselves identified issues with aggression, especially among older grades.
You'd expect to see some suspensions, right?
I did think so. But the sources clearly state 0 reported suspensions between 2021 and 2024.
0. None. For 3 years, with known aggression issues.
What does that tell you?
Are they incredibly skilled at restorative practices, or is something else going on, maybe avoiding documentation?
It could be positive. It could signal a really successful proactive approach to behavior, focusing on de-escalation and skill building instead of punishment. That's the ideal. But it could also suggest maybe a reluctance to actually engage in the formal documentation needed for serious incidents. Or perhaps staff are handling aggression in ways that aren't consistent, or maybe even safe, just to avoid the paperwork or conflict.
Especially if aggression is known to be there. If it's happening, but not being formally addressed with suspensions, someone is absorbing that conflict. Probably the teachers.
Precisely. Are the alternative strategies whatever they are actually working to keep things safe and orderly, or is the problem just being managed under the radar? This is likely why the inquiry question specifically asks how to build staff capacity in social-emotional learning support. They know there's an issue there that needs real skill building, not just avoidance.
That makes perfect sense. And it leads us right into the core focus of their plan. The problem of practice they decided to tackle. It seems like they concluded the answer wasn't just fixing math or science individually.
Exactly. They made a bigger diagnosis. They basically said, look, these behavioral issues, the aggression, the lack of focus, the trouble collaborating, even the absenteeism, they aren't just separate discipline problems. They're all symptoms.
Symptoms of what?
Symptoms of underdeveloped learning skills, especially those tied to social-emotional learning, or SEL.
Ah, okay. So the idea is that if you improve things like self-regulation, empathy, responsibility, those core learning skills, that's the key to improving both academics and behavior.
That's the central hypothesis. Teach a kid how to manage their frustration or stay organized, and they're less likely to act out and more likely to complete their work. Teach empathy, and you reduce conflict.
And the specific student needs they identify in their own internal documents seem to back this up, right?
Absolutely. They listed 5 specific things they saw kids struggling with. 1, evaluating other viewpoints critically. They actually called this needing non-egocentric behavior. That's pure social skills, empathy. 2, difficulty pulling out key points from lessons or texts, evaluating arguments. That's organization, critical thinking.
Okay.
3 was more academic, strengthening writing and estimation skills. But then 4 and 5 come right back to it. Needing to stay organized, stay focused, complete tasks. That's classic executive functioning. And 5 repeats the need to behave in non-egocentric ways.
So it really connects the dots. A kid acting out or not finishing work isn't just being bad. They might lack the skill of self-regulation or organization or perspective-taking.
And the implication is that these skills need to be taught explicitly. Learning skills become part of the curriculum, not just something you hope kids pick up.
Like teaching math facts, but for behavior and work habits.
Pretty much. They define learning skills as including citizenship, cooperation, empathy. These aren't just nice-to-haves, they're teachable competencies. Self-regulation helps with focus. Empathy helps with aggression. It's a direct response.
And they weren't starting entirely from zero, were they? The sources mentioned a program called PL.
Right. The PALIS program focusing on inclusion peer mentoring was already happening, so they have a positive base to build on. The goal of this LIP seems to be making that kind of SEL support more explicit, more consistent, and system-wide across all grades, not just one program.
Okay, so that's the diagnosis and the core idea. How do they actually plan to build that staff capacity? Let's get into the intervention toolkit, starting with the basics. Professional development, PD, and something called collaborative inquiry.
Yeah, the foundation is targeted training. The plan calls for PD sessions focused squarely on SEL frameworks, specific techniques for conflict resolution, strategies for teaching self-regulation. They mention using resources like the Healthy Schools Toolkit, so giving staff concrete tools, not just theories.
And it seems like the training needs went beyond just typical classroom management issues.
Definitely. The sources explicitly mention a need for staff training on suicide prevention and life promotion. That tells you the level of mental health need in the student population is really significant. It goes way beyond just academic stress. The whole staff needs to be equipped to support kids at that level.
Okay, now this collaborative inquiry, or CI approach, they chose this specific four-step method. Identify, invent, investigate, assess. Why that, instead of just, say, bringing in an expert for a workshop?
Because CI is designed to be deep and ongoing, not a one-off. It's job embedded. The teachers themselves go through this cycle.
So they identify the problem in their own classroom.
Yes.
I
Then they invent possible solutions, maybe based on the PD they received. Then they investigate. They actually try it out with their students. And crucially, they assess the results using data. Did it work? Did student focus improve? Did collaboration get better?
So it makes the teachers active researchers in their own practice.
Exactly. It's about constructing knowledge together, not just receiving it. It fosters that collaborative learning culture that the Ontario Leadership Framework talks about. And it ensures the solutions are practical, relevant to Hunters Glen's specific kids, and backed by evidence from their own classrooms.
Makes sense. Now, for these interventions to be effective, they need solid theoretical grounding. The plan anchors the PD in two key learning theories. Let's start with social constructivism.
Right. Social constructivism is super relevant for SEL. The core idea is that we learn through interaction, through dialogue, in our social and cultural environment. It's not just knowledge being poured into your head, it's built together. Collaboration is key.
Okay, so how does applying social constructivism actually help students who struggle with being non-egocentric or collaborating?
It changes the teacher's role. Instead of lecturing, the teacher becomes more of a facilitator, designing activities where students have to interact and solve problems together.
Like group projects.
Exactly. Think complex group projects, debates, simulations where they have to understand different perspectives to succeed. They're learning the content through collaboration and practicing those communication and teamwork skills at the same time. The source mentions Ricardo's French immersion class as an example, focusing on communication and real tasks.
So learning by doing.
Yeah.
Socially.
Yeah.
Okay. The second theory is cognitivism. That sounds more focused on the individual's thinking process.
It is. Cognitivism sees learning as an active mental process, how we think, process information, organize it. This directly targets those executive function issues: focus, organization, task completion. And the key tool here is metacognition.
Metacognition. Thinking about thinking. How do you teach that to a kid, especially around emotions or organization? Seems abstract.
You make it concrete, you teach it explicitly, like a procedure. The PD focuses on giving teachers specific metacognitive strategies to teach students.
Like what? Can you give an example?
Sure. Say a student gets easily frustrated. A cognitive approach would teach them an internal script, steps to follow. 1. Notice I'm feeling frustrated. 2. Pause. 3. Identify why. 4. Take 3 deep breaths. 5. Ask for help using calm words. You're giving them a mental tool, a process to manage the emotion.
Ah, I see. Turning the internal chaos into a manageable sequence. And for organization, like figuring out key points in a text.
That's where cognitive tools like visual organizers come in, as mentioned in the sources. Using things like mind maps or graphic organizers helps students visually structure the information. It makes the thinking process visible and helps them organize the key points. The goal is they eventually internalize that structure and don't need the paper tool anymore.
Okay, so staff get PD grounded in these theories. But how does leadership ensure teachers are actually reflecting critically on their practice and not just, say, blaming the kids or sticking to old habits?
Good question. They plan to use the Brookfield model of reflection. It's a structured way to look at your practice through 4 different lenses.
4 lenses. What are they?
There's the autobiographical lens, your own experiences as a learner and teacher. The student lens, trying to see things from their perspective. The colleague lens, getting feedback from peers. And the theoretical lens, comparing your practice to research and best practices.
And why is that student lens particularly important here at Hunters Glen?
Because it forces educators to really try and empathize. Think about it. A behavior that looks like defiance through your own adult lens might look completely different, like sensory overload or communication frustration, when you genuinely try to see it from the perspective of a student with ADHD or who's on the spectrum, especially in a high-stress environment. Using that student lens helps challenge assumptions about why a student is struggling.
That makes sense. Empathy is a tool for reflection. And all this reflection, all these new strategies, it has to tie back to data, right? That OLF capacity using data.
Absolutely. The collaborative inquiry cycle demands data, but importantly, they're training staff to collect and analyze data beyond just test scores. They need data on the learning skills themselves.
So how do you measure something like self-regulation
You use things like student self-assessment checklists, rubrics to assess collaboration during group work, teacher observation notes, specifically tracking focus or task completion. You gather multiple pieces of evidence, triangulate it to see if the interventions are actually moving the needle on those specific SEL and executive functioning skills. If a strategy isn't working, the data tells you, and the CI team goes back to the invent stage.
Okay, this is really comprehensive on the staff capacity side. Let's shift to the other major part of the inquiry question. Building relationships with parents, especially newcomer parents. The data showed some big hurdles there.
Huge hurdles. It's not just language barriers or parents working multiple jobs, although those are real. There's a significant cultural barrier mentioned.
What kind of cultural barrier?
The idea in some cultures of a very clear separation between home life, family issues, and school life. Private issues versus school issues. This makes it really difficult to get parents to come in for meetings with the school support team, the SST, especially if they think the meeting is about a problem or a failure at home.
I can see how that would be tough.
Yeah.
And it's probably even harder if the child has identified learning needs, right? Like ADHD or autism spectrum disorder.
Dramatically harder. The sources are quite sensitive here, noting that newcomer parents might need support, grieving the fact their child having alternative learning needs.
Grieving. That's a strong word.
It reflects a deep emotional process, and it's often made worse by a lack of easy-to-access local support services. Plus, very importantly, a powerful cultural stigma around mental health or learning differences. Parents might fear judgment from their own community if they seek help or even acknowledge the need.
So they might feel isolated, maybe ashamed, and therefore reluctant to engage with the school about it.
Exactly. It creates the cycle of low engagement stemming from fear and stigma.
So how does the action plan propose breaking through that? How do they build trust and culturally responsive relationships?
The key seems to be building trust slowly and respectfully, applying those social constructivist ideas to parents, too.
How so?
By engaging parents in ways that value their knowledge and focus on the child's strengths and the family's cultural background, not just starting with the problems, it's about shifting the dynamic so parents feel they do have something valuable to add, countering that don't have anything to add feeling.
Making it a partnership, not an intervention.
Right, and tailoring the approach. The sources suggest using that Brookfield lens, again the student's perspective lens, but adapting it to understand the parent's perspectives. If staff understand the cultural weight of calling a parent about aggressive behavior, maybe they reframe the conversation around helping your child build cooperation skills, using language that reduces stigma and builds bridges.
That sounds crucial. The plan also seems to look beyond just SEL at the broader environment.
Yes, it takes a more holistic view. They mention integrating Indigenous teachings, using resources from the health board on things like tech hygiene and screen time.
Ah, the screen time issue. That comes up a lot.
It does, and the school is acknowledging that parental concerns about technology impacting kids' focus and behavior are valid and need to be part of the conversation about overall well-being and learning skills. They're trying to connect the dots systemically.
Okay, we've talked about the problems, the interventions, and the how, the theories, the reflection. Now, let's talk about the who. The leadership and accountability needed to make this happen. It's all framed by the Ontario Leadership Framework, the OLF.
Yeah, the OLF is like the guiding compass. It outlines 5 core leadership capacities, and you can see them reflected throughout this Hunter's Glen plan.
Let's tick them off. We've seen setting goals that very specific inquiry question.
Yep. Aligning resources with priorities, focusing PD time and money on SEL and CI.
Promoting collaborative learning cultures. That's the whole CI process.
Right. Using data collecting and analyzing those learning skills metrics.
Okay, what's the 5th one? Engaging in courageous conversations. How does that fit in here? Seems pretty relevant with all those data contradictions.
Absolutely essential. Courageous conversations means the leadership has to tackle the tough stuff head-on, constructively.
Like questioning that crazy 15% to 58% math jump.
Exactly. Or asking hard questions about the grade 1 literacy swings. Or having frank discussions about why aggression is noted but there are 0 suspensions. It takes courage to demand transparency and confront inconsistencies, even when the data isn't flattering. You can't just sweep it under the rug.
And the leader themselves, the principal Ricardo Cummings, the plan, even includes a personality profile using Luminous Spark. How does that connect?
It seems to reinforce his suitability for this kind of challenge. The profile shows him as very high in commanding red energy, 96%.
Commanding red. What does that mean in practice?
It suggests he's likely very goal-oriented, decisive, driven, and comfortable with accountability and confronting issues directly. He'd be the one pushing for the data, insisting on the systematic approach, making sure the inquiry stays focused.
Okay, and he was also high in inspiring yellow.
Yeah, 83% inspiring yellow. That complements the red. It suggests he's also good at seeing the big picture, spotting trends like connecting behavior to learning skills and communicating the vision, getting staff buy-in for the SEL focus. That blend of driving accountability and inspiring vision is pretty potent for leading change.
Makes sense. Beyond leadership style, there are formal professional standards.
Mhm.
How does this whole LIP connect to the Ontario College of Teachers, OCT standards?
It connects directly. Ethically, the focus on student well-being, empathy, SEL support, that's the standard of care. Building trust with newcomer parents, respecting cultural differences that hits trust and respect.
And the practical side, the standards of practice.
Leading the collaborative inquiry shows leadership in learning communities. Using CI and reflection to improve teaching methods is professional practice. Researching theories like social constructivism demonstrates professional knowledge. The whole initiative is grounded in those professional obligations.
Finally, let's talk brass tacks. Accountability. What are the principal's actual legal duties here, especially around supervising staff and making sure this plan gets implemented?
Well, the principal wears the legal hat for the school board at the school level. Under the Education Act and regulations like 298, they have broad duties. Supervising staff performance, ensuring the curriculum is delivered, managing student behavior, ensuring accommodations are met. It's a huge scope.
And supervision has to be fair and objective, right? Especially if you need to address a teacher who isn't quite implementing the new SEL strategies effectively.
Absolutely critical. Diligence and due process are paramount. If a principal needs to address performance issues, they have to follow ministry and board procedures to the letter. Meticulous documentation of the support provided, the PD, the CI participation, the data reviewed is essential.
Why is that so crucial? What happens if they don't follow procedure?
Failure to follow due process can open the door to grievances, legal challenges, even complaints to the College of Teachers about professional misconduct or failure to supervise. The stakes are really high. The principal has to demonstrate fairness and provide concrete evidence that appropriate support was given before any corrective action is taken. It underscores the need for careful, documented leadership throughout this whole process.
So this deep dive really highlights the immense complexity leaders face, especially in schools like Hunter's Glen with high needs and, as we saw, some really puzzling data.
Definitely. The contradictions, the declines, the cultural barriers, it's a lot. But the core strategy they landed on is quite sophisticated.
Focusing on those foundational learning skills, the SEL piece, as the key lever.
Right. Using solid theory like social constructivism, using a rigorous process like collaborative inquiry, it's a human-centered approach, recognizing you have to build the capacity of both the students and the adults to engage successfully before just tweaking curriculum.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
We spent a lot of time on that massive gap in the literacy data, didn't we? Over 90% meeting the standard on the EQAO test, but only 53% getting levels 3 or 4 on their school report cards.
Yeah, that was striking.
So here's the question it raises, and it's fundamental for any education system, really. If our big standardized tests tell us most students are succeeding, but our internal classroom-based assessments suggest almost half are struggling with deeper learning, what does that tell us about the data we rely on?
What's the purpose of each measure?
Could both numbers be right in a way? Maybe EQAO measures a basic level of competence, while the report card aims for something more like mastery. And if that's true, what different kinds of actions does a school like Hunter's Glen need to take? How do they move students beyond just meeting that minimum standard towards achieving truly deep, meaningful learning improvement? That discrepancy isn't just a data quirk, it's a critical question about what we value and measure as success.